February 2016. I heard my dog barking and growling right around 3 a.m. one night. I got up and went to our back door to see what she was barking at. When I did, I saw her running up and down the backyard fence line, barking, growling, and urinating all along the fence with her tail tucked in. My first thought was predator. I knew something was wrong. I focused my eyes to see if I could see what she was barking at and whispered, "Holy shit." I saw something bent over in a circle that was black and looked like it had a mane, like a lion. I looked at it for about 15 seconds and decided to run to the bedroom and get my head wrapped light. I put it on my head and ran to the back den and saw that it was still there. I carefully turned on the light and shined it right on it. When I did, it turned around and looked right in my direction. Then, it ran down the fence line with a smaller one in front of it. The best way I can describe it would be to say that it was the size of a lion. It had yellow eyes, pointed ears, huge shoulders, and a huge chest. It ran on all fours. Also, this thing was so fast that it only took about 2 seconds to run down the entire fence line. This wolf was way faster than my dog. I woke up my wife and told her what had just happened. Then we went to the computer and Googled huge wolves in America. Under images, I found a cartoon of a drawing that somebody did, and its head and mane looked just like what I saw. It was called a DOGMAN. Today is April 25th, 2016. In January of 2010, I was driving to LA after spending the holidays with family. I-40 the whole way. After a long day of driving, I stopped at Holbrook, Arizona to get a hotel for the night. I get the room, pull around to the back parking lot, and park my car. I open the back door and start to grab my bags and get my stuff together I was going to take inside for the night. All of a sudden, I hear a crazy sounding roar. The closest I can come to describing it is that it sounded like a mixture of a bear roaring, a pig squealing, and a baby crying. I freeze, look up, and standing on the edge of the raised parking lot next door was some kind of man-dog thing. It was probably around 7 to 8 feet tall. I look at it, it roars again, and I take off running towards my hotel room. I get to the door, scared shitless, fumbling with my key card, and it roars again like it's just to the left of me. I get the key in the door, lock the door, and run to the bathroom and lock that door too. I sat there for maybe 30 minutes. Then I grabbed my pillows and blankets off the bed and slept in the bathtub all night with the door locked. I started searching on my phone for what the hell that was and what it could have been, and that's when I learned about skinwalkers. If that exists, then what the hell else does that isn't supposed to? What was almost just as crazy is that when I bolted towards my room, I left my car unlocked and the doors wide open. They stayed open all night and nothing was taken or stolen, and I had a bunch of music equipment in there. But yeah, be careful on the edges of the Navajo reservation. September 13th, 2013. Before I say anything about my encounter, I just want to clarify that when I saw this thing, I went to Google and searched up what it was. I came across this website and found that another person in Jackson County had an encounter with something like this, so I know I'm not crazy. I'd been studying wolves and their behavior for about 3 years before I had this encounter, and I know that considering Jackson County is about 656 square miles with a population of around 675,000, and it being practically infested with wildlife such as deer, livestock, and predators such as coyotes and foxes, it wouldn't be likely for a large predator such as a wolf to be lurking in the sparse woodlands. The average wolf territory is around 13 to 2,400 square miles, and it'd be easy for such a huge creature to live just in Jackson County alone. This may be even the very same dog-wolf man thing that the other person saw. Anyway, on to the encounter. I was just chilling on the laptop in the living room, watching people blow stuff up, when I felt like I had to go to the bathroom. I set the laptop down and put my headphones on the keyboard and go out of the chair. Let me clarify. I'm not a bloody psychic or a medium or anything, but I have a sort of sixth sense to where I can tell if something is watching me, and I knew something was. We have a huge window on the wall just above the couch, and it was on a particularly cold night, so the windows caught things like breath fairly well. I turned to the window, thinking that whatever it was watching me from there, and I knew I'd see it if it was, since we have motion sensing floodlights, and it'd have to be either standing on something or tall as the devil himself in order to see into the window of our trailer, since it was around 6 to 8 feet off the ground, with the top of it being about 11 feet. I looked over the window, and the only thing I could see was the floodlights were on and something seemed to duck under the window, like a kid playing hide and seek. I didn't think anything of it, considering our neighbors were a sort of druggy and alcoholic kind of family, and often came to look in our windows, and every opening to the house was locked. Because of this, I had nothing to worry about. I went to the bathroom, and when I had finished, I washed my hands and went back to the laptop. I noticed that the floodlights went out, so whatever it was gone. Not thinking anything else of it, I went back to watching people blow stuff up. I should mention also that my eyes are sharp enough to spot a bird about 50 feet away in a tree, so it's no surprise that when the floodlight came back on, I noticed it immediately. I glanced up from the screen, expecting a drunken or high idiot to be looking in with a stupid expression on his face, but I was frozen by what I saw. It was a huge wolf that was looking at me with dirty ambery yellow eyes. Its ears looked like they were torn or cropped or something, and the face looked somewhat human. Not really a full human face, but more like the jawline looked very masculine and the human compared to the rest of its face. Its lips were curled back, and it seemed as if it were snarling, though I couldn't hear if it was, and its breath caught on the cold glass. It was so tall that the top of its head was halfway up the window, and if I had to guess how wide it was, I'd probably say maybe the width of my shoulders. I knew that whatever it was, it most likely had wolf instincts, so I did the only thing I knew to do, which was avoid eye contact and make yourself look as small as possible as you could, whilst having your throat and underside showing. This is a very common submissive position, and although I was scared out of my mind, I knew that holding eye contact would make it seem like a challenger, and running would make me seem like prey. When I did the submissive position, it must have worked for it to leave me alone because it just hit the window, which made the entire trailer shake, and it went away. I hadn't heard or seen anything else like it since, although I do hear the odd howl coming from the back roads. God help the poor idiot that decides to try and hunt this thing down. I can tell you now that whatever it was not friendly, because if it were, it wouldn't have slammed my window as hard as it had, and it would not have been growling like I'd taken its food. Although it practically did assault my window, I could understand why it was upset. I was on its territory, after all, an intruder and possibly a threat to its existence and its prey. It's really just best to stay out of its way and respect it. After all, it is one of God's many strange creatures in the world. I'm new here, but with everything that's going on, it's about time I shared some of my experiences. There's a resort over by Lake Powell, and it's a little nicer, and the cultural influences feel more genuine, as we would often have members from local tribes show us to the mesas and hikes and whatnot. We had this one guy who was our homie, and he took us everywhere and would tell us all the stories and whatever. There were these caves they were not allowed to go in though. They were rather beautiful because he warned us bad creatures lived there. When I would pry into which kind, I asked mountain lions? No, we have guns to protect us from those. And I was left stumped. A few days later, there's an eclipse. For reference, it was the 2nd-ish week of January, to maybe early February 2019 I went. I was out by the pool viewing as they had shut the lights off and there were few guests because it was off season. My friend went back to the room to grab another blanket. I was getting excited as it was getting closer and closer to the peak of the eclipse. I thought I saw him coming through the slats in the fence area around where I was. I saw what looked to be a tallish guy who was slightly hunched over, forward, and had a light by the head area. I thought maybe my friend was on the phone and wrapped in a blanket, which was normal for him. I ran around the corner to tell him to hurry up, and it was gone. A little confused, but hey, the lights were dimmed if not off, and I was so excited that I brushed it off. We were in a car to drive to our next activity the following day with our buddy I mentioned prior. I hadn't told my friend yet, so I told him my story, and our buddy looks back at me. He tells me about the skinwalkers, how they sell their souls, and I was lucky to have seen one and been okay. First time I have ever heard these, I lived on the East Coast. Long story short though, our trip ends on the last day. We are packing the car and our buddy finds me. He gives me a dream catcher and some tea and some feathers. I emphasize gives me as I didn't have to pay, and tells me to stay safe. Nothing too serious, but something rubbed me the wrong way, and I trust my gut too much. Hi, I live in Western Australia, and there's been some spooky things happening lately. Not sure if this is a skinwalker or something similar, but figured here would be a good place to ask. Over the past month or so, every night around midnight, my motion detector light goes off outside of my house. I'll peek through the window and see an animal just staring at my home. It's normally a smaller animal, like a cat or dog, but then after a while, it will turn and go away. One night, it happened again, but it wasn't a dog or a cat. It was a man, and he looked like he had a fur cloak on. From what I could see, it was dog fur. I was having a heart attack, but then he started walking towards my house. I immediately closed the blinds, and after a minute or so, opened them again. He was gone, and I saw a cat walking away from my house, going the exact way he had. Is this a skinwalker? Or maybe an Australian version of one? Sorry if this is rough around the edges, I just don't remember it that well. If it happens again tonight, I'll post a new thing about it. June 2000. I had been up all night at a friend's house in the town of Tribby playing video games. I didn't want to sleep there, so I said goodbye and headed home. I knew my car was making a funny noise, but I thought surely I could get home. Well, I was driving down a long, dark stretch of highway with nothing but forest and a few sparse country houses. I was coming up to the top of a long hill, when suddenly, my car stops pulling forward. The engine revved, but no gears would engage. My CV joint just went out. I was hoping that wouldn't happen. Well, I had no way of getting it home, so I backed down the road, in neutral, and off onto a side road. I thought about staying and sleeping in the car, but something told me not to do that. I had an eerie feeling of being watched, so I grabbed my video game case and my machete that I had made from a lawnmower blade and started walking. I kept noticing the feeling of being watched, and it felt like I was being followed. I kept looking behind me and saw nothing, but when a car passed by, heading in the direction behind me, it illuminated the area when its headlights, and I saw something behind me in the ditch hunched down low. It was huge, and I could tell it looked animal, but had very humanoid features. It seemed to have arms, but its head was most definitely canine. Its head was very large, and its eyes glowed red when the lights hit them. Well, I've seen enough werewolf movies to know that this wasn't a good situation, so I started running. That probably wasn't the best choice because I know that predators like to chase things that run for them. When the car had passed, the creature had darted into the trees. I thought that was the best time to run, so I did. I ran for about a quarter mile and looked back but didn't see anything, so I kept walking. Well, I kept checking behind me and off to the side where the tree line was. I knew it was still out there and probably following me. And yeah, I was afraid, but I was also prepared to defend myself with my machete, if need be. I came up onto another hill and saw a farmhouse off in the distance to my left, down a long dirt driveway. The moon was almost full, and the area around the house was clear, so I could see a guy out there messing with his truck as I walked by. Then, he turned on a spotlight on his truck and spotted me with it. I kept walking because his property said no trespassing, and many out there wouldn't hesitate to unload on a strange trespasser. I knew it was close again, possibly closer now, and it was about to turn around and face it when another car came over the top of the hill and passed by me, going behind me again. I followed with my eyes and noticed this time it was a cop, so thinking quickly, I dropped my machete on the edge of the grass and waved. As he passed, his lights hit the ditch as well, and I saw the dogman was very close, but it darted into the trees again when the light hit it. Thankfully, a moment later, the cop had stopped and turned around. He came back and asked me what I was doing out there, so I told him what had happened with my car. I didn't mention the dogman though. He may have thought I was crazy, but I asked him for a ride home. He agreed after wanting to go check and make sure my car wasn't blocking the road. After we checked it, he agreed to take me home. I don't know what might have happened that night if he hadn't shown up, and it was the only time I was genuinely happy to ever see a police officer. So, I spend a lot of time out at my friend's property in Plateville, Colorado. So 2 nights we were just hanging out, and I decided that it was late and I should head home. It was about 12 a.m., so I got in my car and I was driving down his dirt road when my headlights suddenly dim and my motor sounds strained, so I slow down. I drive a pretty modified car, so it has weird issues a lot, so I wasn't worried. So I open my glove box and get my flashlight, and then I look up and see something standing in the road. I quickly reach back into the glove box and grab my gun. So I hit the flashlight and the thing starts to move. It looked like a coyote, but a lot bigger, and instead of paws in the front, it had almost human-like hands. The only issue was this thing was massive. It was the size of a St. Bernard. It walked off the road into the field. I tried to find it with the flashlight, but it was gone. So I get back into my car and take off, and it wasn't acting weird anymore. About 5 minutes later, the same thing happens, and that creature is just sitting in the road again. This time, I didn't stop. I just kept going and didn't hit anything until it was gone. I grew up on a farm, so I'm used to strange noises and weird animals. This thing was different. I've never been this scared in my whole life. I was shaking and short of breath for at least 2 hours afterwards. This happened when I was about 9 or 10, which is why I'm not exactly sure on the specifics of the encounter. However, I think I've figured out pretty much well how it went from thinking it over so many years now. I am absolutely certain of the few brief seconds I encountered the creature. When I was younger, I lived in Texas, which is what makes me think it was a skinwalker and not something else since it's down south. And at the back of my house was a 7-foot-tall cattle fence, which I would often look through to watch the cows on the other side. There was a small thicket, 200 to 300 feet away from the fence. I went out one day to watch the cows, which were pretty far away from the fence. While I was standing there, I guess I didn't notice it approach me, even though it was probably not more than a foot away. But I turned my head to the right and saw a big buck staring me down. I don't know how it walked up to the fence without being noticed by me or noticing me, since deer in general are very skittish. This is one of the reasons I believe it wasn't a normal deer. The next reason is that while our eyes were locked, its eyes didn't look natural. They didn't look malevolent, but they weren't normal animal eyes. They seemed to possess an intelligent quality, as if staring into my soul. The moment that we locked eyes couldn't have been more than a few seconds, but it felt like an eternity. Then, with one motion, the buck jumped over the fence so fast that I didn't even see it jump. I was grasping the fence before the encounter, and the buck's back hooves must have clipped it because I heard a metallic clang and felt the fence vibrate in my hands. Deer can clear fences as high as 8 feet, so I guess the height isn't that odd. What is odd to me is that the deer and I were side by side, and I was holding onto the fence, so I'm not sure how the deer could have cleared it without momentum. Then again, I don't have experience with deer, so it could be something they're able to do. I don't know. Anyway, it bounded into the thicket, and I saw a doe, what I think was a doe, join it in there. But I waited for them to come out and they didn't, which is also very odd to me. The thicket wasn't big either. Another odd thing I just realized is while we were out there during the day, because as far as I know, deer are mainly nocturnal, and this was midday. After this happened, I ran inside and told my mom and dad, and that's basically where it ended. I've been wondering if anyone has had similar encounters to mine for years, because while parts of the encounter are kind of normal for deer, other parts are wildly irregular or out there for deer behavior. If anyone has similar stories, I would love to hear them, and if anyone can tell me if what I encountered was a skinwalker or something else, please let me know. Could this have been a skinwalker, adorned and dressed as a deer? August 15th, 2004. I'm probably the youngest person to come to you about this. I'm 16, I grew up here in Montana, and am very active in the outdoors. When I was 4 or 5, I lived with my parents in a small town next to the highway. Our house was right next to it, and my room faced a gravel road that went into the highway. It was summer, and we didn't have AC, so I would leave my window open at night so I could stay cool. One night, I woke up and noticed a silhouette standing outside my window. My eyes focused, and I saw that it had a furry outline and those frost blue eyes it was using to look up at me. I sat up in my bed, frightened, but I didn't feel the need to yell for my parents or anything. It just kind of stared at me. While looking at it, I saw that it had pointed ears with tufts of fur, like a lynx, and a muzzle like a German shepherd. It was fairly muscular, and was almost resting on my windowsill, like it was leaning up against it. We stared at each other for a good couple of minutes, then it smiled at me, like a dog does, even tilted its head. It then backed away from the window, walked across my yard to our chain link fence, and literally stepped over it. I got out of bed to watch this thing as it got down on all fours and ran down the road and across the highway. Listening, I heard it yip and bark while on the other side, which was a prairie, when a butte and then forest. It was almost like it was calling to others. Looking back on this, I feel like maybe it felt like it didn't pose a threat. Maybe it was just curious. Back then I was just a little kid. Now I'm a lot bigger. I'm 6'7" and weigh almost 200 pounds. So I'm thinking if I saw one of these again, I probably wouldn't get the same reaction. Hi guys, I've been following this page for a while and I recently had a crazy experience. So here's one of my stories. So a little bit of background. I live in southern Utah, and this area basically belonged to the Native Americans for a very long time. There are old ghost towns nearby, and very old graveyards from when the pioneers came in and tried to mine and settle in the area. There is a lot of reservation around also. So basically the perfect cocktail for weird stuff. Anyway, I was out in BLM land one evening by myself because my girlfriend was pulling an all-nighter at the hospital. I was just driving my truck down this dirt road that connects Silver Reef, which is an old mining ghost town, and St. George. I figured I need to get out of the house with the quarantine. No place better to go in the middle of nowhere, so I would not have to be around people. It was late, and there was about an hour of sunlight left, so I pulled over and hiked this beautiful trail that the cattle had made that leads into a slot canyon. I had a flashlight and a headlamp, so I figured I would be fine if I wasn't back by dark. So the hike was going great, and the slot canyon had led me to an area with a lot of Utah juniper trees. It was very pretty, but as I kept hiking, I kept getting this weird feeling like I wasn't the only one out there, like there was something else behind me. I kept checking behind me, but saw nothing. I figured I was pushing my luck because I already lost the sun, so I started hiking back. I was about 3 miles from my truck when I heard something behind me. It sounded like an animal breathing, but like it had been running. When I flashed my lights, I saw nothing. So I kept walking, and after about 40 yards, I heard it again, so I started to get nervous. I knew that the area I was in was most likely Skinwalker territory, so I said in a calm voice, "I'm sorry if I'm not welcome in this area. I will leave now." As I approached the slot canyon, I saw a shadow run past the entrance, and I stopped, dead in my tracks. I could hear the breathing again from the bushes by the canyon, so I ran straight through the canyon and out the other side. I was about 0.5 miles away from my truck, once on the other side of the canyon. As I kept walking, I kept my guard up because of what I had seen, but I had heard the breathing again, and then even worse, I heard whispers. Nothing I can make out, but I know what I heard. So I ran, and right before I got to my truck, I saw what looked like a deer, but had an odd-shaped head, like more round than normal, and I could see its eyes, and they didn't look like a deer eyes. As I had my headlamp on it, I flashed my flashlight on it and ran before my light reached it. It didn't hesitate or run straight for my truck and jump in. I drove straight home and slept with the light on that night. Thank you for reading my experience. I would love to hear what you guys think. This isn't my only experience, but it is certainly my most scary. On April 4th of 2018, I came back home from work around midnight. Like most nights, I sat down on my back porch and lit a cigarette and relaxed. However, unlike most nights, I heard something new. I'm used to coyotes and my neighbor's dogs barking, but in this case, I heard something different. It sounded like a deep howl, but instead of the usual dog sound, it stayed as one tone, and it was octaves deeper. I heard it go from the backyard to backyard, and then the neighbor's dogs started to take notice. The dog's barking triggered one of my dogs to run out to the fence line, and she began to bark at something unseen, at least from my perspective. I got up and I told her, "Hey, come back in, girl, it's okay." She turned to me, and she sat there utterly frozen in fear. It took a few minutes to break her out of this, and she bolted to the back of the door. I decided to poke my head out of the gate and look into the field behind the fence. By the tree line, I saw these amber-colored eyes standing about 5 feet above the ground. I decided to run in and took up my knife and ran out in the direction of the eyes. The whole time I walked that I heard the growls and the howls. However, though when I got close to where I initially saw these eyes, every sound stopped. You could literally hear a pin drop. Where I didn't see anything, I felt the presence of something watching me. After a few moments, I walked back to the porch and sat and had another smoke. It was then the howls started again. This time, though, they came from my neighbor's backyard. They have 2 shepherds, and I will never forget this sound. I first heard this guttural growl noise, unlike anything I've ever heard before. Then, one of the shepherds shrieked, and then I heard the other get slammed against a fence. One thing led to another, and I heard my neighbor fire off a round, and then I heard this thing trail off. The next encounter was just 3 nights ago. I heard the howl start up again, but this time, I heard it making its way through the tree line behind the back lot of my house. I heard the thumping of its feet, and the branches were snapping. Initially, my instincts kicked in to get to go cover, so I shut off the back porch light and allowed my eyes to get adjusted. There was enough light to clearly see the opening in the tree line that's about 2 of me wide and about 9.5 feet tall. I watched in the direction where the noises were coming from, and then all of a sudden, I see it. I see it stand up. I first saw the ears, tall and sharp like knives. I then saw its head, followed by its broad shoulders and long arms. It stood there watching me for what seemed like forever until it turned and ducked down a little and took massive strides on two legs to walk off. It's because of this that I've been conducting an investigation on this thing. I learned there was an encounter in Firestone County, not very far from me. I hope to get reasonable evidence here soon. I have believed in skinwalkers for most of my life, and I'm confident that I've seen a skinwalker 2 times. I grew up spending a lot of time in southwest Colorado by the Four Corners where there are Navajo and Indian reservations. In the small town of Cortez, which is a non-reservation, there is a story known by the locals about this place called Skinwalker Lane. It's this old dirt road just outside the reservation that leads to an abandoned cabin. The cabin is decades old and is said to have been built unrightfully on Indian burial grounds by white men. As the story goes, a white family lived there and disappeared mysteriously. As a couple of dumb teenagers, me and a few of my cousins didn't believe in, well, what we thought was a hoax, Skinwalker Lane, and wanted to go check it out. We all piled into our old Jeep SUV and drove all the way out to Skinwalker Lane at about 11 p.m. at night when it was pitch black. The sky was lit up from the moon, and you can make out the peaks of Sleeping Mountain in the distance, and the edges of the willows which line either side of Skinwalker Lane. As we slowly eased down the road, the car got quiet, and we all had a weird feeling. Deer, in groups of 2 or 3, kept poking their heads out of the willows and just stared at us without caution. I thought this was weird because deer are usually jumpy creatures. After about 1.5 miles of this road, we finally get to the clearing, which opened up to a big field. At the other end of the field, you could see the old cabin. At this point, we were creeped out and reluctantly continued across the lightly used road until we were about 150 feet from the cabin. The cabin was very dark, the wood was rotted, and there were weird carvings all over it that looked like some sort of tribal symbols. We decided to just sit and look at it for a while to see if anything had happened, since we were all too scared to walk up to it. Out of nowhere, this shrill, skin-peeling howl came out of nowhere. It was a long howl, but by the time it had ended, it changed and sounded more like a man screaming. From the left side, something on 2 feet ran heavy-footed behind the cabin, but on the other side came out an enormous coyote, which looked more similar to a wolf in size. The coyote just stood and stared us down, eyes glowing a deep blood red. We were so freaked out and drove out immediately. I will always believe in skinwalkers after that night. When I was a young boy, my grandfather used to talk about all of the mysteries of a world. Back when I was around 7, my grandfather came down with cancer. He had been a smoker for most of his life, but he never really did it in front of me. So I was completely oblivious to the situation that was happening. He would sit me down and rock me and tell me all these stories about when the sun would talk to the moon and the birds were our friends and when we needed friends. But as I grew older, I asked deeper questions. Questions he would answer with, "It's not time for that." When I was 12, my grandfather passed away. My mother was the only child of my grandfather, and she was so broken by his passing, she never got rid of anything he had. During my sophomore year of high school, I was thinking about the things in the basement of my house, and I remember the feeling of digging through all of his dusty books and old pieces of clothing. The smell was something like bourbon, like an old shed of rotting wood. I got down to the last few items in the box, and I saw a blue book face down with my name on it. I grabbed it and opened the first page for it to read, "Dear Jesse, open when you are 16. There was a large S with lines through it on the 3rd page. The book was telling me how to craft weapons for something. Nothing came to mind about the book, so I kept flipping and flipping. Then it was a picture A tall figure with a dark skin and haunting lower jaw. It read Skinwalker, with a 23 on the right of it. I read the description of what it was and spooked when I got done. The numbers were the amount of Southwest that were killed, I think, or that he had seen. Did I go too far and find something worth sharing? Hi folks, I do not want my name out there on the internet because it never goes away. Anyway, a few years ago I decided to contact the BFRO about having Yetis on my place. I call them Yeti because they have 3 toes instead of 5. I always knew we had more than one cryptid on the place. I live on a river and have about 18 acres of land in total. The dogmen have been sighted off Lime Road, which also borders my river. I am from Pueblo, Colorado, and I live on the St. Charles River, which dumps into the Arkansas River. My researchers had me put out cams to see if I could catch any Bigfoot activity. I did, and over the years have caught other strange creatures on cam. I call them hybrids. My encounter started when I was only 8 years old in 1969, when a huge Bigfoot stood up in the front of my dad's Alley's Charmers tractor, and it has continued to this day, and other creatures as well. I have a pic of the dogman that I caught in the river. It takes up a span of 4 feet wide. He has huge shoulders and is staring directly at the camera across from it. Yes, it is black, has ears that tip in towards themselves, and scars on its face, and it appears he is not too happy about having his picture taken. I felt very vindicated when I got that pic and I blew it up in Word so I could get a good look at the creature. Quite ugly to say the least. It is a daylight pic, right about when the sun is setting. Good pic anyway. In the pic he is not standing but buffed out squatting, looking at the camera. That's not all guys, I keep my big dogs in at night because I don't want them killed. I have an older blue heeler and an Irish wolfhound mix. He's not as big as an Irish wolfhound, but nonetheless is fast and aggressive. I almost lost him fall. He was 3 at the time. I came home and he wasn't there to greet me, and I found him pretty beat up with a 6-inch slice at his groin, which almost cut into his venal artery. He had no bite marks at all, but he was beat all over his body, like something pulverized him. He was so swollen that you could push in on the swelling like you were pushing in on a semi-inflated balloon. I called my pasture neighbor, who indeed said there was a fight in the river at about 9 a.m. She said it sounded horrible and heard a dog screaming. Well, I said it was my dog. It changed my dog's personality. He is more cautious, skittish, and when these creatures are around, will not leave my side, nor will he venture to the river. Irish wolfhounds are ear, sight, and smell dogs, and when he stands on his hind leg or raises his head, smelling the air, turns around and comes back to me, something is afoot in the river. I have had many instances with these creatures on my place, and I have lost a few good dogs to that river and what runs it. My researchers are mostly into Bigfoot and do not come around much anymore. Matter of fact, one moved away to another part of Colorado. They are cryptologists. Gentlemen, be very careful with going into the woods with these things. I can prove these creatures and others are not what we know as normal animals. Dogmen are very hard to kill, as well as Bigfoot, or as well as the other creatures on my place. I hope you carry a very large caliber weapon when out humping it in the woods. I have a picture of a hybrid that kind of has like an ape-like face, huge shoulders, not much body, and African lion feet. You can see 4 shadows in that picture, and it's quite a picture. Broad daylight, bright morning, and when I sent it to my researchers, they added some color to the picture to see the creature better and sent it back to me. This is why I say dogmen, Bigfoot, and other cryptids are out there, giants of old. Hi all. I'm not sure where to start, but I used to drive through one of the reses in my state to go get my therapy appointments, as the freeways were always jam-packed at rush hour. It was a pretty normal thing to do, but I had driven through there one night with my friend to avoid traffic on the way to a party, and they started talking about how their friends avoid the res at night because of the paranormal. My first mistake was to then say out loud, "You mean skinwalkers?" Now, I've always been afraid of spirits or creatures coming after me in the night. But recently, a little over a year later, I am experiencing tapping on my windows and sounds I can't quite explain, as well as visual experiences out my window that I can't explain, like figures moving. I don't know if this is more related to a skinwalker or a wendigo hunting. March of 2017. It was 2:30 a.m. and another night of not being able to sleep due to back pain. I was lying on my side, reading, when my very close by neighbor's motion detector light turned on. This happens from time to time, and when it turns on, it lights up the entire sides of my house. We have lived here an entire 9 years, and I have never once seen anything walk past my bedroom window at night. Since I was facing my large bedroom window, the very bright motion detector light going off caught my attention. I looked up and saw the side silhouette of a dogman. I said, "Holy crap!" It was walking past my bedroom window. I saw it from mid-shoulders up. The shoulders were huge and its head was huge. It had pointed ears like a German shepherd dog and a longer snout. Its mouth was slightly open as I saw a large tongue that seemed to be lolling to the side of its mouth. When I saw this creature and spoke those words, I swear that thing slowed down and smirked and then kept going. That's all I saw that night. Last week though, while in my bedroom again, I heard something huge land on the ground behind my bedroom wall. That wall has no windows. I heard deep, kind of raspy breathing. I started praying, pleading the blood of Jesus over my house, grounds around it and all. I do this most nights, but sometimes I forget. I'm awake most nights until 3 a.m. or later due to having severe spinal issues as well as fibromyalgia. We live in a lovely manufactured home community. There are lots of trees around here, and it's very close to canals, large open fields, and woods. I know this is what I saw, but the fact that I saw that has left me amazed. Why is that, when so many are also seeing them? I guess I just thought that since I am in the house most of the time, due to my health, I would never see them. The space between my neighbor's house and ours is roughly 10 feet. My husband went outside weeks later, once I got the courage to tell him that this happened, and measured the area by the window. That dogman had to be at least 8 feet tall. What concerns me greatly is that no one in the police department or government will alert people to their existence. People are walking around feeling a false sense of security. I know I did. I won't even try to walk outside anymore, and yes, I have cautioned my neighbors, the ones with the security light. I can't think of any other details right now, but it's important for you to know that several years ago, a homeless woman was camping out down by the river here in Albany. She was found dead, and her tent was torn up. I believe the police report in the newspaper said she was torn up as well, but I honestly can't remember any of the details. To the best of my knowledge, no one was ever caught for that crime. This is a sleepy town, just over 50,000 people. We no longer get the newspaper, so I have no idea if this happened again. I do know that a couple was down by that same area and saw a dogman. It really frightened them badly. I heard about that on another YouTube channel. I just want people to be aware so they don't go out at night anymore, especially near the river. But then again, we're not near a river, and I saw one in the middle of the night. Thank you for reading this report and for doing all that you do to make people aware of what is really going on out there. I can't exactly say I've always been a believer in skinwalkers. My dad used to talk about them and how he believed in them, but I always thought it was silly. Tonight, that changed. I snuck out of my house to go out on a walk. It was about 2 a.m., and my parents didn't exactly know. It was mildly peaceful. I'm not very much afraid of the dark, so I don't get anxious from these kinds of walks. It's windy tonight, so there were a lot of loud noises. I got far from my house, where there is a large stretch of woods. It's an area where we don't usually see deer because it's close to a highway. It's southern Maryland, so it's usually foxes and birds at best. I inspected the woods and had the most terrifying and blood-curdling fear when I saw what I can only really describe as a skinny, disfigured silhouette with antlers. But not like a big deer. They were small. It stood tall and is unlike anything I've seen. I cannot even comprehend what I've seen. I don't know if it could have been real, and within 10 seconds of seeing, I took off running, and I couldn't think of anything else to do. I ran fast, not looking back. I was so terrified. I ran through my neighbor's yard to get home faster. I don't know how to feel about it. I don't know if I'm overreacting and I just saw a deer or something, but I don't know if I can sleep. I'm constantly looking outside and terrified. In northern Idaho, in Hoodoo Valley. Last winter, right after the first snow, my mother and I were driving home from a nearby town. You have to cross the train tracks twice to get to my house. After the second crossing is our neighborhood that all the kids of craziness hang out and talk about signs about giants in the woods and government cover-ups. The hoodoo legend of the howler. We've always thought these people were talking about Sasquatch. We are members of the BFRO, but we never guessed a chance for Dogman. We were passing the Looney House, and it was around 2200 hours with clear vision. There's a bullpine tree line to my right and a hillside to my left, and my property straight up on the top of the hill. My brights were on, and I remember scanning the tree line as we're passing. At about 12 feet up were two red reflected eyes, surrounded by a black mass with shoulders, no neck, and impronounced ears. My shock caused me to ditch the front, not paying attention to the road. We were high-centered for about 5 minutes. I stepped out to lock my hubs, and I remember that overwhelming feeling of being watched, which hurried my project. When I got back in the car, the feeling didn't go away. I quickly got out of the ditch and sped up the hill to the house. My mother was asking me why I was so worried, which she later found out why. About midnight, Mom was woken up by the most guttural howling you can imagine. Mom yelled at me through the house if I was awake, and I had already had my window cracked and listening to the sounds that we still hear every now and then. I then located Mr. Vic, who runs Dogman Encounters on the East Coast. He gave me the best info he could, which was extremely helpful. I then armed myself with an AR-15, .45 revolver, and a .380. It was the best I had at the time. I figured a guy on the phone might be full of it, and the only way to get the truth is to find it yourself. I tracked through the snow to the location I seen the eyes in the exact tree. There were no tracks in the snow. I thought I was just seeing things and got all worked up over nothing. But then, I looked up. Around 13 to 15 feet up in a tree, and about 7 feet up as well, were claw marks dug into the tree. I started looking for other trees, and sure enough, there was a trail of claw marks from tree to tree. Eventually, the mystery trail came to an end and gave into another shocking trail. Large enough to dwarf a lion print, were the largest dog prints I have ever seen. The trail seemed to step over large brush piles and bushes. Eventually, it led to the quad trail that follows the lower part of my property and Hoodoo Lake. What I saw next still lies there. A deer carcass with no head, no hindquarters, and no vital organs. On closer examination, the neck bone was crumbled and shattered, surrounded by torn flesh. Both legs were broken with no bite marks, and the ribs had been separated in a pattern that indicated hyperextension. There is a lot of scuffle in the snow from coyotes, but I've never seen coyotes leave the breast meat and backstraps. What concerned me even more was I found a leg wedged in the fork of a thin pine about 12 feet off the ground. This tree couldn't support a bobcat. I've never gone back in the woods behind my house without being armed since. My neighbors now think I'm the crazy one. I dress in full combat gear when I set trail cams. I guess I'm the weird one now, but I will tell you this. There is something in the woods that has the rancher across the street thinking a grizzly attacked his cows in November. Every neighbor hears the howls. I asked my landlord at the bar if he had seen or heard anything while he was living here, and his face just went white as a ghost. I haven't had a sighting since, but I did have an ice ball thrown at my car. There's no kids in the neighborhood. Okay, so my dad bought a cabin in the woods about 3 years ago, and I've gone every other weekend, but I don't know if I should go. Me and my friends decided to go this weekend, so we all packed up and began a 3-hour drive. We got there late, so we just went to the front yard and started a fire. Only thing we had brought in the house at this point were sleeping essentials, so one of my friends decides to take a piss in the woods. He was gone for maybe 40 minutes. When he got back, he looked pale. I asked him what was wrong, and he looked at me and said nothing after about 2 hours. We then went inside, and we all went to our separate rooms. And after about another 2 or 3 more hours of sleeping, at about 4 a.m., rolled around, I was woken up by my friend's screams when I went into his room. He was gone. I ran downstairs to the car where my other friend was sitting, waiting desperately for me. I jumped in and I asked him what had happened. He started to drive at about 90. I saw a black figure in the tree line running towards the car. It was keeping up with us, and I was astonished, but after a while it stopped and turned towards the cabin. We didn't see it, and so we stopped driving until we get to the nearest town when we get back to my place. My friend told me what he had seen. He told me that he had heard the screams and ran into the room, but when he got there, he just saw a black figure in a window, and it looked like a wolf, but stood like a man, and it had our other friend in its mouth. He said that the creature ran into the forest with our friend, and he then ran to the car and saw me running out. I don't know if I could ever go back to that cabin again.